in Imperial 2030, there are these six world powers, but it's set in 2030, obviously. So, yeah, in 10 years from now, will those be the six world powers?
Well, definitely two of them will be, which is the USA and China. They're the two largest countries in terms of GDP, um, and definitely seen as two opposing superpowers in the world at the moment. And by 2030, uh, they may even switch positions. So at the moment, the US is the largest economy, but it's predicted that China will be the largest economy by 2030. So, which is kind of why the US sees it as a bit of a threat.
What
So
about India?
India, yeah, I mean, India's another, like China's another fast growing economy. It's what we like to call an emerging market. So that's a place that's moving from a more traditional economy, so like agriculture or manufacturing. That's more services or technology. So yeah, India's growing fast. It's got a big population. By 2050, it's thought that it would be the second largest economy in the world.
Even though Africa is takes quite a lot of area of the board, it's not regarded as a power. And the game is set in 2030. We've had the Black Panther movie, and just yeah, culturally, we're trying to challenge ourselves to think about Africa more positively. And yeah, so I think that thematic, that's a bit that jars now. It seems a
Mm.
bit dated, doesn't it?
The old image of Africa is a place that's quite, low income, high levels of poverty. But I mean, the reality is that Africa's a vast place. I think there's over 50 countries. It's a very diverse place. So there's some countries that are quite strong and have good incomes. There's a movement to have a trade agreement with all the different countries across Africa. Yeah, and more countries having democratic elections.
So in Imperial 2030, the game is about like we are players are like James Bond supervillains. We have money and we put the money into these investment tiles. Does that have any make any sense in economic terms?
Yeah, so you can actually invest in governments anywhere really, because one of the ways that governments raise money is through something called a bond, and this is basically something that they sell to people. So say that I had 10 grand that I wanted to put away into some savings. Obviously, I could do that with a savings account, or one other way is that I buy a government bond. I'm essentially lending the government some money for a fixed time period. Governments aren't that risky, they're not gonna unlikely to fail. Then it means you don't get that much interest on it.
Does money buy you influence whenever you make an investment?
Well, for instance, if you buy a share in a company, then you're basically gaining part of that ownership of that company. So see dividends, and you can vote on uh, policies that the company brings up at their meetings. But with the government, it's different because you are receiving the money back at a fixed date, you essentially have no control over that money. The way that Imperial 2030 thinks of it is, say, what if we had governments that sold shares? So thinking of it in a way that government is like a company where you can, yeah, buy stock and have some sort of ownership and control over. So it's sort of like merging ideas from the real world into the game.
I suppose that works because then you end up with a map and territory. It's not so abstract.
This game depicts a world war, so governments will be wanting to raise money for their military efforts. In fact, back in World War II, governments would do that through something called a war bond. So it was essentially a normal government bond, but it was used to finance military operations and building tanks and planes. Governments sort of had to appeal to people's patriotism.
In our last game of Imperial 2030, we were playing with Nick, and he invested his money in Russia, but then he invested more money in Russia. You really don't want to be the only person invested in a nation. So I guess that makes good economic sense, right?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, in the game, it can increase the risk of that country doing badly, and economists like to talk about diversification of risk.
Okay.
So that's the idea that when you're investing money, you want to invest in lots of different avenues and places, so that one company did badly and you lost money out of that, you didn't lose too much because you got money invested elsewhere.
All right. Well, thank you, David, for joining Unfussy Board Games for this video.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me.